There we go. Right, thank you everyone. Thanks Paul and the Bitkiwi team for having us all today. It's been an early start for me. I've been up since about 3 a.m, so I'm running on 3 hours sleep and a can of White Monster, so bear with me if I'm a little bit slow. Look, I'm James. I run a very small law firm in Te Awamutu. I've been into Bitcoin reasonably long time now, but I really when around 2020 I got really interested in a problem I identified with inheritance planning for Bitcoin. Large part of my job is doing wills, estate management for people when they've passed away, and I identified that there's quite a complex issue, particularly when you're self-custodying Bitcoin, and how we get that, from the person who's passed to the people who survive them. So the first part of this is going to be a 101 on estate management and the wills process. So nothing to do with Bitcoin, but while I'm doing that, I want you to think in the back of your head about your Bitcoin setup, and think about the issues that your setup might pose in each of these sort of steps of the process. Okay, so everyone's got a different setup, but think about the what could basically go wrong between A and B, and hopefully by the end of it we'll tell you about the different stages, and then I'm going to give you some sort of practical solutions, but the bad news is there's no perfect solution. So let's go. Look, chances are everyone here is going to die at some point, so we've all got something in common. It's not something to joke about, but when you work in this business, you've got to have sort of some put some humour into these sorts of things. So Bitcoin is property. It has to be dealt with like any other asset that you might have, but it does, as I said, create that unique issue and challenge with inheritance planning, particularly for when you're self-custodying. So I hope everyone in the room is, self-custodying. You don't want your Bitcoin on the exchange, but the problem is if your Bitcoin is on an exchange and you pass away, it is actually easier to deal with from an estate management point of view. So, yeah. What I'm going to do is explain why you need a will. If there's one thing you take away from today, it is you should have a will. So here comes the 101 on estates, wills, and then we'll get into the Bitcoin specific stuff. So as I said, think about your own setup as I go through these stages of the process. So quick terminology, 101. The will is a document that you create during your lifetime that basically sets out what you want to happen when you pass away. Pretty straightforward. Intestacy, or the word intestate, means what happens when someone passes away without a will. That's very important. Executors and trustees, somewhat interchangeable terms. They are the people who you empower under your will to fulfill your wishes under your will. So they're trustees, they're often beneficiaries, but not always. And beneficiaries are the people who receive your assets under an estate. So that's usually spouses, partners, children, grandchildren, within reason, whoever you like, but that's your usual set. And then I'm going to talk about the probate process too, because that's important to talk about the risks that come with that, particularly self-custody. Right, this particular point in time, so when someone passes away, there's a period of time where really nothing happens. Someone passes away, family are dealing obviously with grief and loss, and I think that this period of time creates a huge problem for Bitcoin security. So there's usually a period of time between when someone passes away and them even getting to the lawyer's office. That could be weeks. Sometimes people ring, within one day, but it can be weeks, and sometimes families just don't deal with things for a really long time. So if you can think that you've got seed phrases or hardware wallets or anything, your mobile wallets all just sitting around, that is a period of time where no one has any sort of control over the situation. So just be aware of that. As I said earlier, if one thing you can get from this whole talk is do a will. If you don't have a will, your assets are divided or distributed in accordance with the Administration Act 1969, and that act basically determines who takes what under your estate, depending on which family members survive you. As a fairly common scenario, if someone passes away with a spouse and 2 children, then under the Administration Act, The personal possessions, so that's your chattels and other stuff, goes to the spouse. But the spouse doesn't take the whole of the rest of it. The spouse takes the first 155,000 plus some interest, and the rest is divided between the spouse and the children. That's a fairly common scenario, and often not what you would want to happen if you passed away. Particularly if you've got young children. If you can imagine passing away with young children, and your spouse is left with, say 155,000 plus a third of the rest. If you've got 2 children, your children benefit earlier than the second of you passing away. So, yeah, if there's anything I can tell you is do a will, because intestacy is not a fun process to be going through for anybody. Probate, just very quickly, probate is when a will goes to the High Court to be basically validated. We package up the will with some the other application documents, goes down to the High Court at Wellington, they check it over, make sure it's valid, been signed properly, checks for all sorts of other things. That process takes quite a bit of time, and that, when it is granted, possibly 1 to 3 months from the date of application. But again, there is a risk there of that whole period where no one has formal control, because it's not till probate's granted that your trustees have legal authority to deal with your assets. So I'll show you some specifics of that in a second, but just be aware that the will becomes a public document. Anyone whose will goes through probate, you can write to the High Court and say, can I have a copy of Bob's will, and they'll email you a copy. So that's the reason for that is that if you have a claim against an estate, someone needs to be able to check that they weren't left a certain amount of money in a will. So if you think that you've been left money in a will but you can't contact anyone, you can actually just ask the court for a copy of it. So that's one reason why we don't put anything Bitcoin specific in a will, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second too. The next stage in that whole process, so if probate's granted, the next stage is your executors are going to identify, gather and hold the assets. Usually this process is quite a sort of cumbersome process, and there's a set process. So anything like land or shares or money in the bank, it's basically the executors will let the bank know that someone's passed away. The bank will freeze the funds and the bank accounts. Once probate's granted, that's when the bank will release the funds, usually to the executor's lawyer's trust account. But again, there's a whole period of time there where no one quite knows what's going on, and that's that part. In terms of the next stages, once the assets are gathered in by an executor, they're usually held for a minimum of 6 months. There's the probate date starts to clock for a number of estate challenges, so that's why it's quite important. But you're not usually going to see distributions within that 6 months of probate, and it can be a year to 18 months is a pretty standard, typical, from start to finish, from when someone passes to when it's all wounded up, assuming there's no problems. So let's talk about the specifics of Bitcoin there. So we've sort of given you the process. Bitcoin, like all new technologies, as I've said there, butts head with existing legal frameworks. So we've got this new asset that not a lot of people know about, but we have to kind of wrap it up in the existing legal processes that we've got. So this is why it creates a problem. Now, everyone should know what that is on the right there. That is a seed phrase, 12-word seed phrase. First person. I think there's about 30,000 sats sitting on that. So first one to sweep that can have that. So there's a bit of a race there. But this is what I want you to sort of get an idea of. So think about what we just talked about, that whole process. You've got a process of weeks, if not months, where if anyone comes across that and knows what it is, those funds are gone, okay? Title and possession. The legal owner of that Bitcoin is the person who's passed away. Technically, I own that Bitcoin, I bought it, but who has possession of that? Anyone who's taken a photo of that seed phrase technically has possession of that Bitcoin. So, and as the owner of that Bitcoin, I don't know who's going to sweep that. You could, someone could be working on that right now. I'm not looking around the room. Pretend it's not you. You don't. So that's the problem, because throughout that whole process, you're not around to secure those seeds. Yes, you might have your wallets, but if you've got a seed that's not been well protected, then anyone throughout that whole process could see that, take it, sweep your wallet. Your executors aren't getting anything, because trying to find out who did that would be nigh on impossible. So we've got to try and balance the security with the risks. Let's get into it. So I'll leave that for a couple more minutes if anyone wants to take a photo. I don't expect to see any Bitcoin in that wallet by the time I finish this presentation, but if you want it, if you buy us all a drink or something maybe. I think it's about $50 worth. When Bitcoin was 84,000 a few days ago. So, right. So, given what we've just discussed, how do you get your Bitcoin to your intended beneficiaries in the event of death? As I said, striking a balance between security and secrecy during your lifetime, but with the ability to access and transfer in the event of death. That is an incredibly complex situation, which is why I wanted to give this talk today. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each person in this room who self-custodies Bitcoin is going to have a different scenario, different wallets, different setups. I've got 10 mobile wallets on my phone. Most of them don't have anything in it. I know what's in it, but no one else knows. I might have one with Lightning wallet with 50 cents in it. I might have another wallet with a reasonably significant amount. You shouldn't hold, of course, a lot on a mobile wallet, but what I'm trying to get at is everyone's setup's different, so you have to take that sort of sovereignty and make your own plan. So let's talk about how that might look. I just want to say that you will have to trust someone at some point in that process, whether that's a friend or lawyers, or someone, because you can't get to A to B without some level of trust. Okay, Bitcoin is trustless, but if you pass away, there's going to have to be someone who takes that on in some sort of trustworthy capacity. So think about that. Consider the points of failure in your security setup, and there is no, as I said, no perfect solution. All options have trade-offs, and some people might have secret sats that absolutely no one knows about. They haven't been bought on an exchange. That situation is going to be different than if you've bought all of your Bitcoin from Easy Crypto in the last sort of 3 years. All those holdings you should treat them as sort of known to Easy Crypto and all those sorts of things, or any exchange. So, as I said, your situation is going to be different. You need to take that into account. This is sort of just a comparison of the processes you might go through if you were managing an estate where someone was self-custodying versus if someone was holding their Bitcoin on an exchange or in a third-party custodian like a Zappo or a River, all those sorts of things. So what you can see from this is that the process is unfortunately easier for an estate management process if you are holding your Bitcoin in a third-party custodian, much like a share broker, like a share registry might hold the records of the land registry. Those centralised things make that process easier. But on the left there is the process for someone who would be self-custodying at a very bare minimum. So I won't read each one of those out, but security of devices and seeds is going to be the biggest thing there, and how that looks and how that works, something that you really need to consider. So what do you do? What is the solution? There is no perfect solution, but let's try and give you some practical steps to take. Reviewing your wallet and storage setup and security at regular intervals. As I said, you might not want to have 10 different mobile wallets on your phone, because if someone does need to access your phone and you've got different passwords, you want to maybe simplify things a little bit for them. Plan as if your Bitcoin is worth 10 times what it is today. That's always sort of been a bit of a mantra of mine. Even though Bitcoin is free to secure, I think you should allocate some investment to a security budget, whether that's tech, security and good advice if you need it. And think hard about what you want to happen to your Bitcoin. If you did die, some people would be quite happy for it to be sold by their executors, and that's it. The money just gets divvied up. Some people would want it held long term. Again, everybody's going to be different, so that's something for you as a sovereign individual to think about and decide. One thing I do want to just point out is try not to send your executors and your family on a treasure hunt. So you sometimes hear about this where someone has devised an incredibly complex treasure hunt for, finding the Bitcoin or the seeds when they've passed away, whether they've sort of buried them or something like that, which is, look, that's a fine option, but what I'm trying to say is don't make it so damn complicated that the people who are just dealing with your death have to go and dig up with a metal detector some metal seed that you've put, in the Kaimanawa Ranges or something like that. So just think about that from the other person's perspective, not your own. You might think you've got the best plan in the world, and it might be a great plan, but it has to be able to be, followed and accessed, and the people doing that are going to be grieving and stressed, and just consider that. That's all I'm really saying. And just a quick point, not to seed split. So sometimes people think, I've got a 12-word seed. If I split my 6 words in one piece of paper and put it here, and put my other 6 words over here, that's going to be a great idea. Turns out, I think, Katana, you might know about help with this, but I think wallets can be brute forced if you have 6 of the 12 words. So that's not a great idea. It's quite often I come across people who go, look, I'm just going to put half of my seed here, half of my seed there. They're going to bring them together. 6 of those 12 words will likely be brute forced in the wrong hands. So that's not a good idea. I've said it again, make a bloody will, okay? Just do it. The will doesn't necessarily have to deal with your Bitcoin specifically. We definitely don't, as I said, we don't want to put in seeds, addresses or balances into that will, but I will come back to this point in a minute when I talk about tax, but we'll come back to that. Choose your executors carefully, okay? Your executors are the people you are trusting to give rise to your wishes. Usually someone's going to appoint their spouse, maybe their children as a successor, but if you're dealing with Bitcoin, particularly self-custodied Bitcoin, you might want to think about someone who has some technical competency in that area, someone who's not going to... I've seen it online where people have put a seed word on Reddit going, my son's just passed away, I found this in his drawer, can someone help me? There have been cases of that. I've seen it on, I think, Reddit at some point. So choose the people who have authority to deal with your assets carefully. Consider an independent professional trustee. Again, that's likely to be a lawyer or an accountant. Shameless plug. But don't be afraid to do that, because it's not necessarily going to make things more expensive for your estate administration. In fact, it can actually make it easier, because your executors know what they're doing as professional trustees. They don't need the lengthy letters of advice and all that sort of thing that runs up costs with estate management. So just consider that. Get advice. Every family structure is different. Everyone's wishes are different. If you have a complex family situation, if you've got children from previous relationships, all those sorts of things, it's just really important that you sit down and take legal advice about that, because there are so many complexities and fishhooks and those sorts of things that can really trip you up if you don't quite know what you're getting yourself into there. So get good legal advice about your will, and review it regularly, and know when wills can become invalid, e.g. upon marriage. That's something to, just be aware of that. If you have a will and you get married, that previous will is now invalidated. So if you then pass, there is some exceptions as there is in law, but that's the general rule. Okay, so if you make a will that wasn't made in contemplation of that marriage, then you get married, that previous will is basically null and void, and you're back to those rules of intestacy. So that's not a nice conversation to have with a grieving family when they find that actually no, the will's not valid, and who they thought was receiving things aren't receiving things. So just a couple of tidbits there. So this is basically a bare minimum sample structure for someone who might be holding most of their Bitcoin on a single sig hardware wallet. Give some thought to what you want to happen on your death. make the will, appoint executors who know about Bitcoin and can be trusted, make an access plan document. So this is probably the biggest thing for those single sig, and it somewhat applies to multi-sig as well, but basically one good idea is having your will as one document and having an access plan document, which basically says, if I die, here's how, this is perhaps my PIN to my Trezor, my ledger, my cold card, and as long as that access plan can be stored securely in perhaps a tamper-evident manner, then that's probably the least worst of those options, okay? So that if you pass away, that document will be accessed by your executors and things done properly. As I said, that could be expanded to self-custody, multi-sig. Again, there's an extra layer of complexity with that, so make sure that the people dealing with your estate know what they're doing. And review that access plan regularly, so there's no point having an access plan giving instructions for your ledger, then you upgrade to a cold card and your PINs are different. It's not worth it. So again, that's just that that sovereign, I can't think of the word, but just taking it on yourself to sort yourself out. If you can self-custody your Bitcoin, you should be able to take the responsibility to set these plans in place as well. I just also want to touch on institutional multi-sig and collaborative custody. This is a reasonably new invention. Those are the things like Unchained, Nunchuck, Casa. There's a couple of new ones which I'll touch on, but from a lawyer's or a state administration point of view, those seem to be one of the better options, okay? There's redundancy built in where you might hold 2 of the 3 keys. You can do what you like during your lifetime, but if you pass away, then you've got a 3rd key plus 1 or 2 of your own keys that can be dealt with along with the professionals at, say, Unchained or something like that. Consider it. It's not a perfect option again, but I think personally that is a good idea for at least some of your holdings, particularly if you've got significant holdings. Not putting everything into a single sig hardware wallet setup, because if your access plan is not perfect or your plan is not perfect, then the risk of loss is so high. So diversifying holdings into multi-sig, something like that, is a really good option. Just really want to touch on Anchor Watch, which is something that was only released a few weeks ago, but they do collaborative custody plus inheritance, plus it's insured. Go and look at that, it's quite interesting. It literally is only a month or so old, so there's, don't trust, verify, but go and have a look at what they're doing. It's quite interesting, particularly for, if you've got significant holdings, that might be something that you look at building into your plan. I'm not recommending any of those, do your own research, but those are some of the bigger names in that multi-sig collaborative custody space, which I think is one of the better options. Tax, no tax, yeah. Right. So the good news is there is no inheritance tax in New Zealand, okay? So if you pass away, you don't pay tax, the government doesn't take a cut as such, but I've left a couple of notes there. If you pass away with Bitcoin and it's sort of KYC Bitcoin and your executors then go and sell that Bitcoin to liquidate to give to the beneficiaries, that sale is taxable. It's basically taxed as if you did it before you passed away, so be aware of that. The good news is I spoke to Tim Doyle at Doyle Accountants in Cambridge. He's a crypto accountant, but he is really good. He's helped a number of clients, Bitcoin clients that I've got. And I talked to him about there's a couple of exceptions. So if you gift an asset to a family member under a will, that is exempted from tax. So in the same way as if I gifted a family member money during my lifetime. So our view is if you gift your Bitcoin specifically under your will, rather than having it liquidated, the beneficiaries of that receipt take that Bitcoin and don't have to pay tax on the transfer. What Tim did say though is that if they then go and sell it, say a year in the future, they take on the original tax, the original purchase price as the
cost base.
Exactly what I want. Yeah. So that's your cost base. So they carry the cost base through. Okay. So be aware of that. So if you bought it 50k, you pass away, Bitcoin's 100k, they sell at 150k, they're being taxed as if they bought it themselves at the 50k. Yeah, but if they hold it forever, and go and spend a few years in El Salvador and sell it while they're over there, the lovely people at the IRD might not know about that. So yeah, that's just a quick word on tax as far as I want to go on that. And again, so that's really the wills, the issues. I haven't given you any solutions really, because I can't, but I've given you some things to think about, hopefully. But just some other considerations. Gifting during your lifetime is an option, okay? So there is nothing stopping you giving your Bitcoin to family members if those are exempted under the income tax exemptions. So quite often people will gift money to usually children at later stages in life. There's nothing stopping you gifting your Bitcoin to people as long as they're related to you. So I'll touch on that quickly. If I gift Paul some Bitcoin, that's taxable because Paul's not related to me, okay? But if I give money or if I give Bitcoin or money doesn't matter what, to my wife or my children, my parents, my close relatives, those are exempt under those income tax exceptions there. So,
is there a limit to that? Yeah, that's exactly right.
Not as far as I'm aware, because there's no gift duty in New Zealand. That was done away with 14 odd years ago. So you can gift whatever you like during your lifetime. Take advice, of course, because it does have other implications on things like the rest home care subsidies and those sorts of things. So take advice if you do plan on it, but giving your Bitcoin to other people during your lifetime is a reasonable option. I just want to go back to that tax thing quickly. Tim did say that those FC3 and FC4 provisions haven't been tested, okay? So no one's actually died, given Bitcoin or crypto assets to their children, and then got the IRD to confirm that they aren't exempt, but the prevailing opinion is that they are exempt, okay? So this is the problem with Bitcoin. It's so new, so novel. We're trying to ram it into these existing frameworks, but that seems to be the prevailing opinion. But there is no limit on what you can gift during your lifetime to whoever you like, as long as you're taking the other considerations into account. So there's no gift duty like there was a number of years ago. So that's an option. Enduring powers of attorney. So we've talked about passing away, but what happens if you have an accident, you're in a car crash and you can no longer, say, communicate or something like that? So that's a whole other presentation. I'm not going to touch on that, but you should consider having enduring as a powers of attorney as well. They enable other people to make decisions on your behalf if you no longer can, in respect of property and care and welfare. So just something to go and research again. But as I said, that's a whole other can of worms that provides another whole layer of trouble for Bitcoin, how an attorney deals with Bitcoin. I'm just waiting for that call one day, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But yeah, consider enduring powers of attorney and trusts. Trusts are another, I guess, an option for if your intention is to hold Bitcoin long term within your family. Trusts can provide that as an option, but there is tax implications with trusts, particularly the transfer from the individual to the trust. So if you form a trust and you put your Bitcoin into the trust, that's a disposal for tax purposes. So you want to do that after getting advice. And again, self-custody in a trust needs to be given pretty careful consideration too. Okay. So there's just some further homework for you. Conclusions. Everyone's setup's different. Everyone needs their own plan. I can't, without sitting down with you one-on-one, I can't tell you what to do, but hopefully what I've said will give you some sort of idea, or put the shits up you and you're going, this is all too hard, but I'll leave that with you to go and do your homework. Balance security with effectiveness. If you die today, do you really think your executors or family could gain access to your holdings? Be honest with yourself, put yourself in their shoes, and add a layer of stress on top of that. As I said, can you access your Bitcoin, or could someone else access your Bitcoin following your plan a week after you've had an accident or passed away? Put yourself in their shoes. Multi-sig collab custody seems to be a good option, or least worst option. perhaps not for everybody, but from a lawyer's point of view, from an estate management point of view, it seems to be a good option. I would love everyone to just self-custody their Bitcoin themselves, but collab custody seems to be a pretty good option for at least some of your holdings for this inheritance planning purpose. Consider jurisdictional issues with that. Some people might not be too worried that an American company knows their history, all those sorts of things. Again, do your own research. I think my view is that a combination of everything is probably the best diversification of those holdings. You might hold some in your mobile wallet, some in a single sig hardware wallet. If you've got something that you don't plan on touching for a long period of time, maybe look at putting that into a multi-sig collaborative custody model once you've had a look at everything. So that's, yeah, hopefully I've confused the shit out of you, and everyone's going to go away going, I don't know what to do now, but if anyone's got any questions, well, have we got time for a couple of questions, or if you want to come up to me afterwards, we'll yell them out now, but I mean, I don't want to talk about specifics for anyone. Yes, sir?
Sorry, can you tell me a little bit more about time locks and how that interacts with the probate process?
Yeah, so I've got a rudimentary view of time locks, but my understanding is that there are certain miniscript thing, I'm way over my head here, but there are certain protocol level options that can be baked into things like those collaborative custody models where the certain number of keys needed to sign a transaction can change over time, allowing a beneficiary to have control of the Bitcoin after a period of time has passed. Definitely go and have a look at the Ankle Watch stuff. They've got some really interesting videos. They're on a heap of podcasts. They've only just launched. They've mainly been known because of they're the first to have insured holdings, so insured against loss. Of course, there's a cost to that, but if that's something that you know is of interest to you, go and look at what they're doing. Again, they're really new. I'm not vouching for them, but I'm just saying what they're doing is very interesting. So yeah. Any other questions? No. Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh yeah, just for making me.
Yeah, if they want to hire you.
Oh yeah. Just very quickly. Yes, I didn't mention at the start, but yeah, my law firm, we do accept Bitcoin for legal fees. Some people pay it, most people don't because they don't want to pay with Bitcoin. But I probably would give you a discount if you wanted to pay in Bitcoin because I know I'll get that back at some point. And we also do hold Bitcoin on our balance sheet as a treasury asset. So one of the few businesses in the country that do that. We did that about 4 years ago. Been reasonably good as a savings account basically. So yeah, any questions about sort of what I've talked about now or anything else, come and grab me afterwards. And otherwise, thanks very much.